Welcome back to History of Words. Spring crept gently into Virginia in 1863, but the land remained scarred and hollow, bearing the weight of a nation at war with itself. Trees stood stripped where cannon fire had once rung out. The rivers, once peaceful, now mirrored the smoke and steel of bloodied battles. And yet, in the midst of this devastation, one man, General Robert E. Lee, was preparing to risk everything for what would become his most daring and brilliant military triumph, the Battle of Chancellorsville. It was late April when Union General Joseph Hooker began mobilizing the Army of the Potomac. Over 130,000 strong, his forces were among the largest ever assembled on American soil. Hooker, known to his men as Fighting Joe, was bold, confident, and aggressive. Everything the Union needed after the stalemates and bloodletting of Fredericksburg and Antietam. Robert E. Lee, on the other hand, commanded a force barely half that size. His 60,000 men were battle-hardened but stretched thin, their equipment often outdated, their rations meager. Yet what Lee lacked in numbers, he made up for in audacity. In his weathered hands, defeat was not an option. It was merely a challenge to outwit. The stage for Chancellorsville was set among dense woods and tangled underbrush known ominously as the Wilderness. A twisted terrain where visibility vanished in moments, where cavalry was nearly useless, and where artillery pieces got lost in the thickets. It was a place made not for conventional warfare, but for chaos. And it was here, in this natural maze, that Robert E. Lee would orchestrate the unthinkable. Hooker's plan was, in theory, brilliant. With a flanking movement through the Wilderness, he aimed to outmaneuver Lee, sever his supply lines, and pin him against Fredericksburg. The maneuver was executed smoothly at first. By April 30th, Hooker had successfully crossed the Rappahannock River and positioned his forces near the Chancellor House, a modest crossroads home that would soon be engulfed by the firestorm of war. Lee, always calm under pressure, responded with a gamble so audacious it left even his own officers in disbelief. With Union forces pressing from multiple sides, Lee divided his already outnumbered army, not once but twice. It defied every military principle. But Lee did not abide by theory. He trusted instinct, geography, and the indomitable spirit of his men. While holding off Union forces at Fredericksburg, with a small detachment under Jubal Early, Lee took the remainder of his army to confront Hooker head-on. But he wasn't finished. On May 2nd, he executed the boldest move of the campaign. Lee, in close coordination with his most trusted general, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, launched a flanking maneuver through the densest parts of the Wilderness. That morning, Jackson rode out before dawn, scouting the enemy positions from atop a small hill beside a Baptist church. The Union Army believed Lee was retreating, but Jackson saw something else, a sliver of vulnerability, a flank exposed, like the Achilles heel of a mighty beast. By midday, Jackson's corps of 28,000 men was snaking silently through the woods. The march was long, dusty, and grueling. The men moved quietly, speaking in whispers. Confederate boots pounded the earth in stealth as rabbits and birds scattered. Union scouts noticed movements but dismissed them. To Hooker, Lee was retreating. It was over. The enemy was broken. Or so he believed. As evening fell on May 2nd, Jackson's troops emerged like ghosts from the undergrowth. They descended upon the Union 11th Corps in a tidal wave of musket fire and fury. Caught entirely off guard, the Union soldiers were eating dinner, playing cards, writing letters. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Horses bolted, wagons overturned. Men screamed for their lives as Confederate soldiers stormed in, muskets flashing, bayonets gleaming in the dimming light. Jackson's attack shattered the Union right. It was a moment of supreme tactical brilliance, but it came at a terrible cost. As night cloaked the battlefield, Jackson rode ahead of his lines to assess the situation. He believed the enemy was in full retreat and wanted to push the advantage. But in the darkened woods, disaster struck. Confederate pickets, mistaking the general's group for Union cavalry, opened fire. Jackson was hit 3 times. One bullet shattered his left arm. Another lodged in his right hand. His men rushed to his aid, horrified. He was carried from the field, blood soaking his uniform. The surgeons worked frantically. They amputated his left arm and hoped for recovery. But within days, pneumonia set in. On May 10, 1863, Stonewall Jackson, Lee's right hand, the fearless architect of so many victories, died. When Lee received the news, he bowed his head. "He has lost his left arm," Lee said, eyes misted, "but I have lost my right." Back on the field, the battle raged. Despite Jackson's absence, Lee pressed forward with relentless vigor. He personally rode among his men, rallying them, urging them onward. The Confederate troops, emboldened by their general's courage, repelled wave after wave of Union assaults. At one point, Lee stood upon a small knoll amid artillery fire, his gray uniform dusty and torn. Shells exploded around him, yet he did not flinch. Soldiers looked up and saw him, calm, unshaken, the embodiment of defiance. It became a moment etched into legend. "It is well that war is so terrible," Lee once said, "or we should grow too fond of it." By May 6th, Hooker, shaken, injured from a shell blast, and increasingly unsure, ordered a retreat across the Rappahannock. The once proud offensive ended in failure. The cost was staggering. The Union suffered over 17,000 casualties. Confederate losses, though fewer, were nearly 13,000, nearly a quarter of Lee's entire force. And worse, they had lost Jackson. Yet, in the cold calculus of war, Chancellorsville was a Confederate triumph. Outnumbered 2-1, Lee had defied logic, defied odds, and won. It was his masterpiece. But like all great masterpieces of war, it came with shadows. Jackson's absence would be deeply felt. His unique ability to strike quickly, to improvise, under fire, and to understand Lee's vision had been a cornerstone of the South's military success. And as the months unfolded, the war would tip. Gettysburg loomed. The tide would shift. But for now, in the pine-scented air of Virginia, Lee stood unbeaten. Historians have debated whether Chancellorsville was truly a victory. After all, it left the Confederacy weakened, bleeding, and soon on the defensive. But in terms of tactical genius, of sheer audacity, there is no equal. Lee, with fewer men, lesser equipment, and surrounded by enemies, had crushed a superior force through ingenuity, risk, and faith in his men. The fields around the Chancellor House still carry echoes of boots and bugles, of shouted commands and whispered prayers, of a young soldier clutching his rifle, trembling beneath the trees, as thunder rolled overhead and the ground shook with cannon fire. And perhaps, just perhaps, on some misty morning, if you walk the woods of Chancellorsville alone, you might hear hoofbeats in the underbrush. You might hear the ghostly echo of Stonewall Jackson's last ride, or glimpse through the trees the silhouette of a general who dared to rewrite the rules of war. This was Chancellorsville. Not just a battle, but a moment when everything balanced on the edge of the blade. A moment when courage, folly, and genius collided beneath the Virginia sky. And it remains, even now, Robert E. Lee's greatest triumph and his greatest loss. Thank you for watching History of Words. If this story stirred your imagination and brought the past to life, please like, comment, and subscribe. We bring history not just as it was, but as it was felt. Until next time, keep the past alive.